We are live. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I got to plug in my microphone, so give me a second here so I can get better quality audio for you on this. I don't need my keyboard. Let's see if this does anything. Can you hear me? Salut. Hola, amigos. Buenas tardes. Is this audio coming in good? Can I get some thumbs ups if it's good? All right, great. So we'll work with this then. Thank you guys for joining. Today we're going to talk about how to set up an ideal language learning schedule, plan, regimen based on where you are in your learning journey, what your life is like, what you have in your schedule. You might be a busy person. You might just have, gotten off of work or a school and you have lots of free time. Whatever it may be, we're going to talk about how to think through the process of generating a plan. Okay. Now, when I originally had the idea for this webinar, I was trying to use another technology that would allow me to show you my screen, show you how I set up my own life, as well as speak to other fellow learners for a kind of discussion. However, I realized that there's a bit more complication to that in terms of getting the YouTube link out to people. So I'm still working on how to do that. This time we'll do a normal YouTube live. I can't share my screen. I can't talk to anyone live, unfortunately. So I changed around the format a bit, talk about the same issue, but what I want to give you is general mental models. And then I can actually make a screencast of what my system is so you can see my screen and email that out to you guys this week if you join our email list at mimicmethod.com. But I want to give you a general way of thinking through these things in a nice, clean model. That way anyone can adapt it to their personal situation, okay? Now to keep this conversation style, I'm going to go through these 3 sections and then we'll focus our questions at the end of each section. So there's 3 things you want to think about when setting up your ideal schedule. Basically, it's going to be the what, the when, and the how. So what activities of learning should you be engaging in? You know, people say, should I, do this Duolingo thing? Should I take your course here? Should I do a conversation? Right? There's several activities that you would engage in that would improve your language ability, right? Second, when do you do these things? At what time of day is optimal? How many times during the week? How many times during a day do I need to rest in between? For how long should I do this before I move on to the next thing? These are all, by the way, my synthesis of the questions that I received, several hundred questions from you guys. And I started kind of going through them and looking for the patterns. And this kind of synthesizes all of those repeated questions. So we have, what are you going to do? When are you going to do it? And then the third thing I'll leave the last part of this Q&A about is how. Because your plan, most people make a plan. Oh, great, I'm going to do these activities, 10 times a week at this time, boom, boom, bam. And you feel really good. You get what's called the planner's high when you have everything laid out neatly on paper. And then after a week, it all falls apart. So we're going to talk about how do you actually keep yourself accountable, motivated. Lots of people messaged about having very spontaneous schedules, things that move around a lot. So when something comes up and gets in the way of your original plan, how do you adapt around it and not lose the entire mission? So we're going to get into those things at the end and how I've kind of over a lifetime really struggled and dealt and figured out these things, and really in the past year or two finally started to come into the groove. So this has always been a passion of mine, not just for language learning, but just getting stuff done in general and being a productive human being has always been a passion of mine. So I'm going to share with you my thoughts on these issues. So let's start then with what activities are we going to be engaging in, right? So I'm just going to open up the conversation first in this chat here. I'm going to read out the answers. Those of you who have been learning a language, just think about the past week, what you've done for whatever language you're doing. What activities did you do? Was it reading? Was it an app? Which app was it? Was it going through my course? Was it having conversations? Just start writing the things. I want to see what people are what have you actually done to attempt to improve your language abilities in the past week. We have Kiara says reading, watching telenovelas. I assume for Spanish, not for Chinese. Yes, watching TV shows. Duolingo, which is an app. italki, which is a conversation platform. Memrise, another app. Textbook, something called Closemaster I'd never heard of. German Pod 101, so podcasts. Reading, Glossica, math sentences, language 101, italki, language exchange partners. Shopping, interesting, so actually engaging the world. Going through my course, listening and reading transcripts. Anki, flashcard. We see Netflix, Pimsleur, another program. Singing songs. Great. Cafe Lingo. Great. So if we look through all these things, you can kind of put them into different categories, right? And I'm going to give you a model. So you can look at it from a language learning point of view categories, like the categories of the different softwares or apps like Duolingo, Mimic Method, and Mozalinga, blah, blah, blah. You can look at it in categories in terms of the specific skill of language you're focusing on. So listening comprehension, pronunciation, speaking, grammar, reading, literacy, right? And you have all these different things. And we already have so many different activities and so many different platforms for doing those activities. That's why people get confused. That's why I'm doing this YouTube video and why people are asking, like, what should I do? What should I prioritize? So I want to simplify things for you and give you a basic model for learning. And I'm going to explain that using the analogy of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Now, the reason why I'm using Brazilian jiu-jitsu is, well, two reasons. One, when I came up with the Mimic Method back in 2010 or 11, like just the idea kind of emerged in my mind. It was partly a result of me training Brazilian jiu-jitsu in Brazil. I went there and I wanted to focus on learning Brazilian music, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and Brazilian Portuguese. And that's what I focused all my time on. And I started to see and perceive similarities into how these things were developing within me. And it's actually the same process. It's the process of learning. And I'm going to explain to you what a typical day or a typical class in jiu-jitsu looks like all around the world. First, you come in there and you warm up, and then the teacher, the professor, the sensei, whatever, the coach will show you and demonstrate a technique. So they'll show you how to do an arm bar or how to choke someone or how to get out of a position when someone's trying to choke you, right? We'll just focus on a single technique or a sequence of techniques. And then the first 30 minutes, you partner up with somebody and then you practice that technique. The person lets you kind of go around their arm and do different stuff. And then you're practicing it in a kind of artificial environment. So you can kind of see the details. The guy's like, okay, pay attention to where his shoulder is. Make sure you balance your weight over here. Don't, turn your head this way, otherwise they'll choke you. And you just kind of pay attention to what the teacher's doing, to what other people are doing, and just try to work out the details, right? Second part of the class will then be a kind of more of a drilling type setting. So first you see the teacher do stuff. Second part, you're drilling it and you're repeating it over and over and over again. And you're just focusing on that one single goal of like, get that arm bar. And then you do it, drill until you've just done lots of repetitions on that specific movement. And then finally, the main part of the class, the majority of the time, is what they call sparring, right? Or they can also call it open mat. And you're on a mat, and then you choose someone. They set a timer for 5 minutes, 6 minutes, whatever, and then you guys just go at it, right? And of course, there's rules in jiu-jitsu. You can't punch and like bite people or call them names or whatever, but there's very few rules beyond that. And your goal is just to first, don't get choked out or tapped out. And then secondarily, try to choke out or tap out that guy, right? So you're just going at it. And then you have the infinity of, the human body interacting in all kinds of crazy ways, right? Now, I trained jiu-jitsu very intensely when I first started in 2008. And I remember my first day I went there and the professor, was there, and he's American, he's in China, but it's this American guy there, and I was like, so how does this all work? Like, am I gonna like learn some techniques? And I never done martial arts before. And then he says, so I'm gonna be like, okay, so let's start. What do I do? And I think he's gonna show me how to do a technique. And I don't know how to do it. So he's like, listen, just get on the ground and fight me the way you would fight your brother when you're a kid. And I'm like, all right. And then I start going at him, and then he starts putting me in different positions. I'm like, oh, interesting. And like after that, I was hooked. Right? It was fascinating. I went every day for like years after that. And all right, so why am I telling you this? Because this process that I went through and countless other people have gone through at getting better at jiu-jitsu is the same process that I was going through getting better at Portuguese or Chinese or Spanish. Same process if you do dancing or any other actual physical activities, the same process. And you can divide it into 3 parts: perception, practice, and performance. All right, you should write this down because this is the model I'm going to give you for how to set your schedule. You need to have 3 elements: perception, practice, and performance. So I'm going to apply that to this jiu-jitsu class I just explained to you, and then see how it applies to a language context. Perception. What do we do at the beginning of class? I watch someone who knows better than me do the thing. So he's like, here's how you do an armbar. And then he does it. And it looks pretty simple on the outside, but there's an infinite number of details. So I'm sitting here paying attention, and I'm perceiving the details of the movement. And then I'm making connections. I say, oh, okay. Oh, wow, he puts his hand there. I don't usually put my hand there. I can see why he does that for balance. Or I ask him, like, why do you do that? He's like, oh. And then you're like, pay attention to what I'm doing with my shoulder. I'm like, oh yeah, you're using your shoulder there too. And there's so many things to look at that is impossible to see them all. So you can only choose things that kind of stand out to you or what the guy points your attention to. Either way, you're perceiving details and these connections essentially of how to move in a specific environment. All right. Now, it's not enough just to hold those things in your mind. You need to actually integrate those movements, those ideas of movements into your body. That's when you come into practice. So I told you in the drill part of the session, I'll get a partner and say, okay, now we're going to do an arm bar 100 times. And each time I'm applying what I think I perceived, but then I do it and it's not as smooth as the way the teacher did it. And then I'm looking, I'm like, okay, how was his different? And maybe that guy can tell me, or he can tell me, or I have to figure out on my own. But I keep perceiving myself while I'm practicing the movement, each time getting a little bit better. And then it becomes more and more from my conscious focused mind into my unconscious, automatic, intuitive, motor memory mind. And then finally, we get into sparring. And this is performance. What performance is you're doing all of the movements within that domain, in this case, jiu-jitsu, and you're using all of them towards one goal, and that is to win the match or to not get tapped or to tap this guy. So in performance, you have the whole complexity of things, and you're improvising in the moment, and you're applying all the things that you've practiced and perceived in the past. Okay? So perception, practice, performance. Hopefully, you can now see how this is analogous to language. So I leave jiu-jitsu class and I go outside. I'm learning Brazilian Portuguese. How was I structuring my Portuguese? Well, when I first went to Brazil, I didn't know any Portuguese. So I couldn't just, to start speaking to someone. I needed to figure it out. And then I first had to perceive the connection between a context and a movement. So when someone wants to greet me in the street, or I want to greet someone in the street in the context of greeting someone, then it seems the way these Brazilians do it is they open their mouth and they say, "Oi, tudo bom?" Right? So they move their mouth in such a way in this specific context to produce this sound. Oi, tudo bom? Movement, context being connected. I perceive it and I'm like, I guess next time I want to greet someone, I should try to mimic that movement. So when I'm in that context, mimic that movement. So then I come into a thing like, oh, I want to say hi to this person. I say, I to do beam, right? And I don't get it right, but I'm looking back at that guy. He said, "Oi to do bomb." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Oi to do bam? No, to do bomb." You see what happened? This is the analogous thing of I'm trying to drill and practice my armbar. So I'm practicing what I just perceived, right? And then I'm in a conversation, and the whole point of a conversation, the same way the whole goal and purpose of a sparring match is to choke and not be choked. The goal of a conversation is to understand and not and be understood, right? It's a two-way kind of thing between two people. So now I'm in conversation practice, and then I'm using all the things I've perceived and practiced before and trying to bring it into the conversation and use it, right? So those are the three stages. Great. Now, is that all clear? Is that not too crazy of an analogy? Does this make sense? I suddenly went to learn jiu-jitsu is my next goal. All right, we'll make a separate course on that. All right, great. Okay, now let's make it more practical now. Now, you guys mentioned earlier a bunch of activities you were doing. And we put them, usually we think of them in the categories of, okay, learning literacy and learning blah, 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 blah. I want you to think about it this way. What is the goal of you learning Spanish or French or Chinese, whatever? The goal is, once again, to understand and be understood. The same way how the goal of jiu-jitsu is to win the match, right? We're not competing with our conversation partners, but there is a bit of a sparring going on where it's you're talking, I'm listening, you're listening, and I'm trying to understand and be understood. If there's a referee at the end of my Spanish conversation and he grabs my hand and I win, it's because he's gonna be rating me on how much I understood and how much the other person understood me and what I was trying to express to them. So this is what matters. So first and foremost, it's all about performance. Life's about performance. You want to perform and perform right while you have the stage for the limited amount of time we have a stage, right? And so you need to spend time performing. Now, this is an important point to emphasize, and we'll go into more detail when we get to talking about when to do these things. But what I most often find with language learners is they don't spend lots of guys any time in the performance context, which is conversation. And there's two reasons for this. One is because logistical, you need another person. It's really hard for me to practice jiu-jitsu at home by myself. I need to have another person to practice with. So it's hard to find a conversation partner. We'll talk about that in a moment. But also, even if you know how to do that or you have it, you get nervous. Performance is also what gives us, the most anxiety. So really overcoming that is going to be your primary focus if you have that issue. I find too often people hide in the textbooks and whatnot, and they don't get better. The number one decider of how good someone is in jiu-jitsu is how much time they've clocked on the mat just sparring. We call it mat time. And you see somebody who just knows what to do in any situation, that guy has 10,000 hours just rolling, just sparring. So keep that in mind. All right. So what you want to talk about now, though, is more about the different ways you can perceive and practice. All right. So what are some perception activities in language learning? What I mean by that is someone's making a connection for you between the context and the sound movement, right? So for example, if I'm teaching you French and you say, how do I say hello in French? I say bonjour, right? And I teach you this sound, bonjour, and this meaning of hello, and I'm connecting it. So that being said, once again, I ask you a question now more specifically, what do you find, those of you in the YouTube comments, what have you found the most useful for making those initial links in your mind of discovering? You can think about discovering new vocabulary, but also discovering new, basically, I don't like using the word vocabulary because it's more just about connecting the meaning to the movement, to the sound, to what it is. What do you find most useful for a perceiving activity? Podcast. Yep. What else? And Kiara, you have a specific podcast for your specific language you recommend? That way anyone else who's here can see it. Memorize courses someone recommends. Learning how to interpret and pronounce IPA symbols has been useful. Speaking to women of the different cultures, women of the cultures. Yeah, so you can actually get lots of perception just by speaking to another conversation partner and then asking them, like, what does this mean? What does this mean? iTunes, podcasts, listening to radio, reading subtitles. Okay, so when you're watching a telenovela or any kind of thing and you see a subtitle, you see what's going on the screen, you see the word, you're kind of perceiving like, oh, okay, this is the word people use when they're talking about this. So these are all categories of perception activities, or in the case of jiu-jitsu, I'm just watching, right? And I'm feeling things out. In the case of language, the ears are what matter most. I'm hearing, I'm listening. And you can kind of gauge that by the degree of intensity of your focus. So I want you to think about it in kind of a spectrum this way. You have the most passive activities. You can be listening to radio and kind of, cooking or driving or whatever. Most of your energy is on what you're doing, but you have that in the background. Or it can be a much more engaging, active listening thing where you're, watching a telenovela or you're on YouTube. For Spanish, I recommend Easy Spanish. Just search Easy Spanish. They interview people in the streets and have conversations, and you can kind of follow along with the English subtitles and the Spanish subtitles as well. So this is the context where you're passively learning. Then we have the practice. That's a perception context where things are coming in. And the thing about perception, I'll say two things on that, I'll move on. The thing about perception is this. The more passive it is, the more of it you just forget, which is fine. When I go to jiu-jitsu class, if I remember 5% of what the teacher says in that thing is good. You're not going to remember everything. It takes lots of energy to like capture everything and retain it all. It's too much. So you just want to get something, So you want to kind of be modest in your goals. Come to telenovela, watch it, and just be like, let's see if I can find 5 words I never heard before, right? Or 5 ideas never heard before. And then just focus on that. When you get them, run them in your head, run them through, remember the scene, visualize it a bit more. And then if you get those 5, the next day you kind of quiz yourself and you're like, oh yeah, I got 5 more. Do that every day, and you'll be surprised how far you can get. But then you have the more active ones where it's like people were actually showing and teaching you these things. And that's why, for example, me, when I learn, I like to use things like Pimsleur, which is an audio program. So if I'm taking a walk and I put it on, essentially it's someone guiding me through the process of connecting the two things. So they say a conversation, they say, this is how you say cup. And I'm like, okay, copa, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm making it. So that's a perception context. Then you have a practice context. Practice one is the technical term for that is deliberate practice. Now, deliberate practice is a more intense thing. You're not doing other things on the side. You're focusing all of your energy down for, maybe 20 minutes to 45 minutes. If you go beyond an hour, your brain just shuts down. When you deliberately focus on one single thing and repeat it over and over again, you're rewiring the brain. You're training things very intensely, but it's a very energy, metabolically taxing process. So you can only do it for so much time. And ideally, you should do it at times where you have the energy to do it. All right, so we'll get into the timing later. But that's your deliberate practice. So if you take our courses, for example, the courses that I like to create for people are courses of deliberate practice. So in our philosophy, you need to develop the ability to hear and pronounce things as your foundation for learning. And that's a motor skill. So if you go to one of our lessons, it'll be set up in such a way where, you have 20 minutes of intense focus on trying to drill this specific sound or pronounce a specific phrase perfectly. And you do it over and over again, several reps until your mouth gets sore. I've had people report back of just like, there's people who get like cocky and they're like, I want to do all like 5 lessons a day. And I'm like, okay, good luck. And then they do they can maybe get 2 and they try to do the 3rd one and then their brain just shuts down. They can't take in anything else. And they like, my one guy I knew said he almost threw the computer across the room because he's so angry. So when you move from perception to practice, perception is more passive. You can let things happen and you don't get as tired. Practice is deliberate. It's focused. And it's harder to do. It takes way more willpower. People don't do it as much, but it's essential. Finally, performance, of course, is having conversations. Once again, how often do you do that? If you're not doing it on a regular basis, that's the problem. Here's why. Because I can watch the teacher and watch YouTube videos of jiu-jitsu. I can practice these arm bars until my arm breaks over and over and over again, but it doesn't fully, it's not fully learned. I don't know it until I've used it multiple times, improvised and spontaneously in the context of performance. Because in practice, the guy's just giving you your arm and you get to do what you want with it. In a fight, the whole point is he's not giving you your arm. So you can learn an arm bar on the first day and like get it pretty good after a couple of weeks of practice, but then never actually get an arm bar on someone for months because you don't know how to actually get into that position. So it's the same thing here for language. You can learn these vocabulary words, you can learn how to hear this and that, but all of a sudden you're in a conversation and then you don't recognize that word, or you forget that you know the word. You're, oh, how do I say this? How do I say this? Right? It's not until that moment where you're like, oh, what's the word? And then you say it in the real life spontaneous context. And you know that if you've had that experience, it's a great feeling. You're like, I finally got to use this word. And then all the emotional circuitry, all the things just kind of converge. And now you know it. And now the next time you do it, it's there. And then you do it again a couple more times. And now you just know it the same way you know English. That's a true learning process. It's about bringing all this up to the point of performance and spontaneity. All right. Cool. So a couple more recommendations I'll go through here. So you can see that I love Pimsleur, singing songs, Synergy Spanish is terrific. So there's lots of great resources here. I encourage you guys to kind of keep track of what people are mentioning here, because the collective, you guys know way more than I do about all the different resources that are out there. So now we have these resources, we have a framework for what it is we should be doing. We have perception, practice, and performance. Now the question is, when do we do it? All right. And a couple of things to consider here. First thing you want to consider is the specific activity you have, how much energy is required to do it properly. So for example, deliberate practice is the most energy intensive of the three things, because you're focusing on one thing, you're repeating it over and over again. It can get kind of boring if you do it too much, but it requires just focus, right? It's like working out, like doing your workouts. It's something that it takes willpower to get into it. So anything that's in that category, you want to save it for the time of the day when you have the most energy and focus, which for most people is going to be first thing in the morning when they wake up after a full night's sleep. However, maybe you wake up and then go to work, and you can't afford to wake up earlier, whatever your situation may be. Look at your schedule, look at your daily interactions, and say to yourself, when am I fresh? When can I have some time to do fresh? Not question how much time for it. You have your focused, deliberate practice thing. In my experience, if you have 20 minutes of deliberate practice on something, or even 15 minutes of deliberate, just focused intention practice on something on a daily basis, that is enough to make some serious progress. If you can do even more and do it twice a day, like maybe 30 to 45 minutes, even better. But if you're not already at that level, start simple. Have 15 minutes of deliberate practice on a thing. These new courses we're releasing, that's what I recommend people as a minimum. Just log in and do our deliberate practice training for 15 minutes, and then your ear and mouth and brain will start to get a dose and start changing. Okay. Whereas when you talk about perception things, it's like listening to podcasts and radio. You can kind of do that at any time. Save it for times when you're driving or whatever. There's this thing called found time, which is, if you're just driving the car and you're listening to like top 40 and you don't really care about it that much, then that's a good time for you to integrate that. So look for those times in your day where you're not really doing anything else productive, but you need to be driving, you need to be on the metro, you need to be cleaning your house, you need to be cooking. What are those things you have to do every day that like you might as well put a background audio track to it? I personally, I'm not learning a language right now. So when I'm not learning a language, I actually go through a large number of books on a regular basis. And I like reading. I used to read a lot, but I didn't have time for reading. And then one day someone just convinced me to start doing audiobooks, which I always had to kind of like, oh, really, audiobooks? And I started doing it, and like, boom, I just started reading 4 times more than I would because I had all this found time. I can't read a book while I'm driving a car or while I'm cooking dinner, but I can listen to an audiobook. So basically, I just do the things I need to do all day. And then when I got to drive and do an errand, I just put on my audiobook and I'm just constantly moving through books and getting information. But if it's in language learning time, then that's when I would do my perception practice and just listening to the language as much as I can, listening to podcasts, listening to Pimsleur if I have a safe, more focused time period of 20 minutes to like kind of really focus on it. This is how you do it. So you have the time set out on top of the day or whatever period of time, like 30 minutes where you're really focused on that one thing. Then look into your schedule and see if you can find little transitional moments to sneak in your perception time. Now, the final piece is the most important part is your performance time, conversation practice. This is highest priority because the other two, you don't need anybody. So you can just kind of work it in on your own. But performance in language is conversation. Conversation requires at least 2 people. Finding someone to converse with can take a bit of time. You have to get schedules going. If you're willing to pay for it, there's all those services that allow you to just find tutors and, they can come in on any time you need. But, you might have different budget constraints. There's a lot of considerations there. And I find that even beyond the self-consciousness and the anxiety about speaking, people are not having conversations just because of the logistical irritation of setting it up. So I would highly, highly recommend just, tie on your bandana and just spend this weekend to look at all the things people mention here, italki, Verbling. There's lots of different services you can look at. You can go to meetup.com, couchsurfing.com. Maybe in your area, there's local meetups. Whatever it is, schedule your performance times, schedule your conversation times ahead of time as much as you can. If you can get someone who you can pay or just make an agreement with to meet with at a fixed time on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or at least once a week, the more the better. The more mat time, the better. As much as you can handle. Step 1 is schedule that out and then allow everything else to fold in around that, because you can be practicing and perceiving all day on your car, set aside your time. It just turns into nothing until you get to use it in conversation. So it's just hard to get that going. It's not hard. It just takes a little bit of legwork, go to italki.com, find a partner, learn how to use the platform. Once again, I'm learning a lot about how we feel a huge amount of resistance to things we don't know yet, we haven't tried yet. So if you're brand new to this, once again, just commit for the weekend to figure it out. Do a bit of Google searching, look at the options, look at what people are recommending here. If you have recommendations, people, for what you prefer to do for finding conversation partners, please type them here and continue the conversation on the right side. I think we'll go through and turn all these suggestions into a document we can send out to people by email afterwards. Go to language exchange. If universities have language exchanges, whatever it may be, once again, I just want to finally emphasize this one more time. This is the part that's has the most logistical barrier in front of it. So that's why people don't do it. But it's the most important thing. So schedule that time. So step 1, schedule your performance time. Step 2, scheduling your practice time, 20 minutes, 30 minutes on specific days when your mind is fresh. And then look for found time to put in your perception activities, like listening to podcasts and radio. And then set that, and then that will be your schedule adapted to your specific needs. All right. Now, someone also mentioned Hello Talk. That's a more smartphone-based one. There will be a replay on YouTube Live. It just becomes a YouTube video. CLNA, you're asking about that, so you can watch that afterwards. Now, final part of this call, I want to talk about the how. Now, you have your 3 activity categories: perception, practice, and performance. And then you have your times to do it. You schedule your conversation practices ahead of time as much as you can. You schedule in 20 minutes a day of deliberate practice, of really centered focus. And then you look for all the times in your day that you don't have anything else going on, so you might as well just listen to the language for perception practice. You have those things written down in the plan, in your calendar, good to go. You're feeling good about it. And then a week goes by, 2 weeks go by, and you fall off, right? This is, or maybe you have a very, chaotic schedule, so you can't set things rigidly in place because a meeting comes up, a client calls you, your boss says blah, 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 and then those things get in the way and they stop you, right? So I wanted to move this conversation a bit to how to actually stick with your plans, because this I find is one of the most important skills of life that no one actually teaches us. And some people, just by nature of who they are able to do it very easily. Some people are very schedule-minded, schedule-oriented, and they just like to stick to plans and they feel really good about it. Some people are more kind of chaotic and like to be spontaneous and go with the flow, just by naturally who they are. I'm naturally more like that spontaneous, crazy, go with the flow type person. But I've learned in my life that I can't really achieve the things I want to achieve until I've disciplined that into a structure that I can get it done. So I'll tell you a quick story. For the longest time, for years really, I've always had a difficulty with sleep. And not that I can't sleep. It's very easy for me to fall asleep. The difficulty was for me waking up early, because I started my business early. I never had a real job that I had to like wake up and like go someplace or get fired otherwise. And so after university or during university, my sleep schedule was kind of got messed up, and started getting into this habit of going to bed at random times and waking up at random times. And whenever I wanted to set a habit of waking up early, the alarm would go off and I'd like and just snooze it. And I repeated that over and over and over again until I deeply wired and trained the habit of hitting alarm, like hitting the snooze button and not getting up. And I got really bad. I got to the point where like I just felt zero self influence and control when it came to waking up. And then I'll tell you how I gradually brought my way out of that. So there's a website called stick.com, stickk.com, where you can put money on the line to an anti-charity. And what that means is think of a charity that you just don't want to support or some kind of cause you just are completely against. And then you basically pre-authorize your credit card or your bank account and you say, okay, if I don't do this thing, then this money I pre-authorize will go to this organization I don't want to have my money, right? And then you set a large sum of money, not so much you'll die of starvation if it goes bad, but enough that like you'll be really motivated to do the thing. So in my case, I put a large sum of money, like a really large sum of money, to go to an anti-charity. And the only condition for me not to lose that money to that anti-charity was to send a GPS waypoint on WhatsApp to my friend by 7 a.m. on from the gym. So a gym's like 10 minutes away from my apartment. I was in Portugal at the time. And I'm like, all right, every day I'm at 7 a.m., I'm going to send you this GPS location no matter what. All right. And it was interesting because first day I'd wake up in the morning, the way I usually do, the alarm would go off. And then all the things in my brain would be like, go back to sleep. What are you doing? Nothing matters. And like, and this kind of mental process I trained deeply for a very, very long time. And then I usually I'll go into that. And no matter how motivated I was to wake up the night before, this pattern of waking up and like just going back to sleep was so strong. But now I inserted a new thing into it. So it's kind of like, whatever, I can just sleep in a little bit more. And then it's like, you're going to lose all that money, right? And then I'm like, whoa. And then that would just kind of pop me out of bed. And then after a couple of minutes, I put some water in my face and I'm like, oh, I'm not even that tired. It's not a big deal. And then I go send the GPS waypoint. Some days are hard, some days are easier. But the point is, each day I fought through it because I had something to lose. And so if there's any aspect of your training or your life or whatever it is that is really deeply entrenched, like you have a really tough time doing the thing, you have two choices. You can continue doing what you've always been doing, which is telling yourself in moments of like a little bit more motivation, like, oh, this time for the first time ever in 10 years, I'm going to do this thing differently, right? And then each time you do that, you dig yourself even deeper into the grave. And then it doesn't happen and you hate yourself and you feel bad about it. Or you can be serious and put stakes on. And you can say to yourself, like, all right, if this really matters to me, then I should be willing to put something on the line if I don't do it. So you make your schedule, you make whatever the plan is, and then you go to selectstick.com or you go to a friend and then you say, hey, listen, I'm going to penalize myself in this way if I don't do this thing. Now, you got to be careful because you can't overdo it. You can't say, oh, I'm going to study, 50 hours a week each week. And then, blah, blah, blah. Because then that's going to burn you out. So I'll explain this more in the video that I'm sending out to people about how I do my scheduling. But the way you deal with that is you do short time windows. So start with this, just like a 3-day or, I do in 7-day contracts I make where you say, okay, you have an idea based off this video, how you're going to structure your learning schedule. Make that schedule and then commit to follow it just for 3 days. Or maximum 7. But if you're really new at this, try 3 days. And then you say, I'm going to do this for 3 days and pay attention to what happens. And then you go on stick.com and you put money on it. So you're serious, you're committed. You're not just talking trash and then forgetting about it later. And you really put it on there and then you do it. What you'll find the first time you do something is that your plan sucks. Most plans suck, right? The famous quote, most even the best laid plan never survives contact with the enemy. Or I think there's another like boxing one where everyone's got a plan until they get hit in the face. Like whatever plan you had sucks, and then you go out there and you do it. But then you realize like, oh, I didn't take into consideration that like by 3 p.m. I get really tired, or my daughter starts crying because she's 2, and I don't have time to like study Spanish because I have to go and change her diapers. There's always things you don't think about, right? But it's not until you actually make a commitment that you actually power through it that you learn how things work. So that's the final piece of it that I want to say, and I'll open up for Q&A right now for the last 15 minutes. But the point I'm trying to make there is the ideal plan or schedule you make for your learning is one that actually works and actually carries you to your goal of being more fluent in language. And a consideration that people never make in the planning phase is how are you actually going to stick to the plan? So be honest with yourself. What have you been able to do before? Don't commit to doing anything more than you've actually proven to yourself you can do. So I've given you these structures of the time you spend perceiving, the time you spend deliberately practicing, and the time you spend in conversation and performing. And then if I were to prioritize it, I'd prioritize scheduling your performance partners first. And then it's different times you can be doing it. So think for yourself, when can you do it? And then think, what's the minimal amount I can commit to? And then actually make that commitment. Tell someone about it. Go on stick.com, put money on the line, or just make an agreement with a friend who's not going to be lenient with you. And just try it out and expect your plan to adapt over time. But as long as you're doing something and you keep your mind focused on the end goal, you keep your eyes on the prize, so to speak, then things will improve. You'll get better. You'll learn more. You'll get more ideas. You'll learn how to integrate them, and you'll progress. Because the alternative is you don't do anything and you get stuck where you are, which is the most frustrating part. So I hope that was useful for now. Once again, I apologize for not having the ability to have a screencast going on or having conversation with people. Maybe next time we can do that. For now, I'll send you a screencast afterwards of what my system is for getting stuff done so you can get more technical detail. I had to be kind of abstract and vague here because you couldn't see my screen. But for now, I think that's good enough. What questions do you have? Interesting. Jack said Discord chat rooms. Jack, how would you go about finding these Discord chat rooms? Discord is a messaging application where people form little kind of communities on stuff. I haven't actually used it. I've seen other people use it mostly for like Bitcoin stuff, but hopefully Jack can have some advice there. Oban said he also uses Focus Me to block from certain websites. That's a good point as well. Another thing you can factor into your plan is what gets in the way of you following through on things like language learning or fitness or whatever. The biggest culprits for people is going to be social media, web surfing, and maybe like Netflix and TV. So if you use apps like Focus Me, there's also Freedom and other apps that just block those things. So maybe you schedule out of your day, like, okay, during these 2 hours, I want to dedicate to like self-improvement, 20 minutes of language learning. I'm going to just schedule in that like during those 2 hours, my Facebook and my Instagram and my everything else is just blocked. I can't even access it. So I have no choice but to study stuff, take those things seriously. I've had like a side project last year making courses on helping people break free of their different technology addictions and be more committed to their goals. I researched this quite a bit, and it's kind of scary to the degree to which our modern environment is just designed to destroy us. Like the modern environment of technology and food is designed to thwart your true goals in life. So it's just way harder to do stuff you really want to do because people are constantly throwing distractions in your way. So you have to be proactive to fight back and put those distractions away. If you want to know me personally, I don't, I have my phone on airplane mode until about noon every day. I don't see any messages or anything. I don't really have any social media stuff that I do anymore. I have Facebook because it is needed for, Messenger and connecting people, but I don't really go on it anymore. I don't watch any TV. Audio is the king because you can be something about listening to something versus watching it. I listen to lots of audiobooks and podcasts. I can like clean my room. I can do like little kind of workouts and stretches in my room while I'm learning and listening to stuff. I feel good about myself afterwards. All that motivation carries. So yeah, if you have goals like learning a language or getting in shape and you struggle to actually achieve them, and you also have many hours a day sucked into these kind of black holes on the internet and TV, then you should consider making that a priority to get that under control in your life. And it's really important not to feel not to beat yourself up about it, because once again, you have the most intelligent engineers in the world with the most sophisticated artificial intelligence technology in the world with billions of dollars behind your screen, just figuring out how to make you not do the things you want to do and instead look at their apps so they can make money. So it's really a serious problem. So if you have that, I recommend checking out a website. It used to be called timewellspent.org, where they changed it to the Center for, I think, some human design or something like that. They have a good page on things you can do to it's called humanetech.com. I'll put the link in here for a list of like simple things you can do to get control over your technology, and that will free up lots of energy for you to focus on stuff like learning a language and improving yourself and improving the lives of others. Oh, great. Someone mentioned joining Toastmasters group for public speaking in Espanol to help improve my speaking. That sounds great. So if you have that opportunity, that's definitely performance there. Okay, good question. Is it more important to focus on performance compared to deliberate practice? Yes. Now, I told you that story of how when I got into jiu-jitsu the first time, the guy didn't teach me a technique. he just started to spar with me, because you need to have a context for things to make sense to you. So if I'm just learning stuff in isolation, then it doesn't really make any sense. But if I've had lots of conversations, then someone teaches me something, I'm like, oh, I have something to refer back to. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I could have used this move there, or I could have said this phrase in that conversation. So your foundation is always the performance. So the trouble is that if you know nothing, it's kind of hard to engage in the conversation, but you'll be impressed at what you can do if you just have basic words and you get over the whole perfection mindset and you say like, all right, how can I express myself here? Like, what's this? Agua, water, blue. And you're just like, me, water, eat water. Oh, drink. Okay, me, water, drink. And then you can get basic stuff going on, and then like, you want to spend as much time in that context as you can, until you get to that point I call the shift. After that, you start getting more gains from like specific deliberate practice to refine your technique. But you need to get to that point where you feel comfortable in a performance context as quickly as possible. So you always want to prioritize performance over practice. Okay, cool. So someone was asking, I had asked, where do you find chat groups for Spanish? And Eduardo said Reddit is a pretty good place to look for Discord servers and other services for languages. So this is some deep into stuff. I should look into this myself. But for those of you who are a bit more tech savvy, you want to go to Reddit and like look for these different chat groups and find conversation partners. Again, I'll say about finding conversation partners, in my experience, people just kind of give up very early because they're like, oh, there's 2 sites and I don't feel like paying money, or like this person, I was speaking to a woman recently, and there's a whole other issue if you're a woman as well, where, you have to kind of seep through, you have to sort through all like the creepy guys who are looking for something else. And that makes it even more challenging. But I said to her, same thing I said to everyone else, it's just like, if you're trying to hire someone for a job, most of the applicants you get are not going to be good enough for the job, right? You don't hire the first person who comes your way, nor do you give up if the first 5 people suck. You just have to keep doing it. And this is another major life skill, is just commit to like go through X number of applications, or spend, an hour or 2 hours just researching Google and Discord forums, and, spend a week. And if you just dedicate yourself to the mission of finding like at least one reliable conversation partner who you get along with and you like talking with, and that lasts for a long time, man, that pays off so much. It's just that people give up because they can't find something easy within the first 15 minutes. So yeah, unfortunately, it won't be done for you entirely. These services pop up and they kind of do much of the initial sorting for you, but it's like anything else. It's like dating, it's dating or hiring, or, finding human beings who mesh with you on the activity you're trying to do isn't something you just do on your first try. Like, it takes some effort. But if you do the effort and you have your sparring partner, your conversation partner, now you have the foundation of what you need to get better at the language. Jake recommends taking time to write out a list of motivational reasons to learn the language. So when your motivation dwindles, you can remember why you're learning and get back to your agenda and schedule. Yeah, good point. So one of the keys of motivation is you need to have your why, start with why. And what I say in Mimic Method, which I don't hear emphasized nearly enough anywhere else, is that language is just a tool for human connection. So the people I know who are fluent in languages have some sort of deep emotional connection to either specific people who speak the language or the culture as a whole. So for example, when I learned Brazilian Portuguese, I was steeping myself in Brazilian music. I was also obsessed with Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So when I go to jiu-jitsu class, and I'm training with like some of the people who originated the art form, and they're explaining a technique, and I really want to learn this technique, but I can't because I don't know the word for elbow, then I'm really motivated to learn the word for elbow and to remember it, right? So that context of just being around a group of people I wanted to interact with, and not being isolated from them was a very strong motivation for me to learn. Now, obviously, I was in the country, and immersion throws that in your face much stronger, and maybe you don't have that opportunity, but you can still create that emotional connection. And if you find people you want to connect with, and you really think about, like, why do I want to understand this person in Spanish or in French or German, whatever, then you visualize what it will be like when you can actually be fluent and connect with them freely the way you would in English. You make the more meaningful you can make that, the more motivated you will be to power through all the difficulties of finding a partner, and you know bending your lips and mouth to pronounce those sounds, and trying to embarrassing yourself in conversation and building up the courage to enter into a speaking environment. All these things are just difficult. It's just resistance, and you're not going to do it unless you have a reason. So really good to center yourself and understand what your reasons are. And in my opinion, the only reasons that are deep enough and meaningful enough to sustain you through the whole process have to do with connecting to real human beings. Cool. Good question here from Oban again. You've been getting some good questions here. During performance, when you are being taught many words or expressions by a friend, how can you remember all these things? I feel like I forget so much. So that's a good question. I'll say there's one more part to this thing, which is, the perception, practice, performance, they form a loop. And the idea here is, what should I be perceiving? There's an infinite number of details of a language, like, a million words, all these different grammar points and different slang. What should you be paying attention to? And the answer is going to reveal itself to you through your performance. So the thing you should focus on perceiving and practicing is what you're performing poorly at. So if I'm so what I would do, I'm really intense on learning a language fast, is I'll record my conversations. And then so I'll be talking with someone, I'll record a bit of it, right? And then afterwards I can go back and review and just kind of listen to it and just kind of pick out certain things that, like, I thought were really off, or if I learned how to do this, it would most improve my speaking. Now, you can't do it all, it's too much. So you want to, like, limit it to, like, maybe like 3 things or 5 things. And I'm like, listen to a conversation and I ask myself, if I kept everything else about my performance the same, what's one thing I can change that would make it the most improved? And then what's another thing, right? And I'll take those 3 things, and then I'll find that based on my review of my conversation. And then I'll go and ask people, or my teacher, or whatever thing I said, hey, what's the better way of expressing myself in the past tense here? What's a better word to use in these contexts? Blah blah blah, right? And then I perceive that, and then I'm like, okay, now let me practice it, and I'll say, like, okay, I'm just gonna make a script. I'm gonna make a little 5-sentence thing that I want to make sure I integrate into each conversation I have. I'm gonna repeat it over and over again and memorize it by heart, bring it into a conversation and integrate it. And then after a couple iterations of that, now that thing is no longer a problem. And this is what professional athletes do, for example. They'll record, a basketball player will record his game and then go back and watch the tapes afterwards and be like, okay, my 3-pointers need to be improved, or my left side on defense needs to be improved. And then they go to the gym and then they drill and they practice it over and over and over again. So you see that perception, practice, performance loop is constantly in motion. And in order not to overwhelm yourself with the infinite number of things you can improve, you just want to think to yourself, what's one thing I can improve that'll have the most impact? And if you keep repeating that process, then consistency is the final piece of it. If you do that consistently, you will just get gradually and gradually better. You'll start to hit kind of points where things will start to synthesize, and you'll have, like, huge jumps. and leaps in your ability, but only if you stick with it and if you do the right things. Let me see. Well, I'll take one more question here. Let's see a good one. All right, this is one with Sheila about vocabulary. It's okay. Someone's asking about. All right, that's what we just talked about. No, that's a different answer then. Eduardo says, keep yourself accountable by telling other people around you that you're learning. That way, each time you see them, you kind of feel more of a impetus to practice. Someone's asking us one more question. What is your schedule for maintaining and improving different languages simultaneously? You know, it's funny. I'm noticing now as I'm going through all the surveys for questions about language learning, this is a very common question. And it's about just multiple language learning simultaneously. I think I thought about this actually. I think language learners like ourselves tend to skew on a personality dimension called openness, which is about partly creativity, but also just learning new ideas, experiencing new things, and just variety. People like variety of experience, and I'm certainly that way. And when you're that way, you'll have a stronger desire than the average person to do a bunch of things. So like, oh, I want to learn how to paint, and I also want to learn how to speak Spanish, and while I'm at it, I want to learn how to speak French, and I also want to, get my dancing skills improved and whatnot. And this has been the huge challenge of my own life. I have so many things I want to do, but I've come to learn that the only way I'll be able to do any of them is to sacrifice the ones that are not as important and just single-mindedly focus on one at a time. And then get that to a level of satisfaction. And then if I decide to, I can move on to something else. But it's focus that's at the essence of efficacy. So if when it comes to maintaining a language you already know, I wouldn't worry about that so much, because if you've already gotten to the point of conversational fluency, it's deeply ingrained in there. Now, I stopped jiu-jitsu for several years, and I just got back into it like 3 weeks ago. So I keep using these analogies. And it's kind of rough at first. I'm like, I forgot how to do these moves. And, people are like kicking my ass and stuff. But actually, in the past couple of days, I finally started to get back into the groove of it. And I'm remembering someone showing, I'm like, oh, yeah. And then my body's getting back into it. Now I'm like breaking people's arms and tapping everyone out and stuff. I'm, yeah, I'm back, So I'm not as good as I used to be. And it'll probably take me a while to get back to that stage. But I definitely didn't lose it. It's, the majority of the core foundation is still there because it's deeply ingrained. And that's because I single-mindedly focused on jiu-jitsu for a significant period of time and deeply buried it into my brain, in my body. So I would just recommend to all these people who are really looking like, how can I do two things at once? Personal experience, the experience of very successful people I've met, and empirical research all bear out that single-minded focus and doing things in sequence rather than simultaneously is way more effective and way faster. And if you think about it, the only reason why you would be tempted to do two things at once is because of a sense of impatience. But I want to have both. I want to have them as soon as possible. So let me do both at the same time. But actually, the fastest way for you to get both of those things is to choose one, focus on that until you got it, and then move on to the second one. All right. So I know it's not what people want to hear. They want to have some crazy secret trick of like, this and that. You can do it, but like, once again, it takes a lot of energy. It makes it more difficult to maintain the plan. There's a potential of interference between things confusing you. Now, if you're an interpreter and that's your job, then that's a separate skill. And like, yeah, you want to learn how to do those things. But I would just say like, focus on what's going to be relevant to you in the next 6 months, and then learn that language. Cool. All right, so we're 5 minutes over. But you guys had some great questions and great content. I'm gonna put it in my to-dos. I'm experimenting with these live streams, and you guys are bringing lots of interesting suggestions and whatnot. I don't want to lose it. So I'm gonna see if we can figure out a way we can get the highlights from these conversations and all the recommendations, and like include that and email it out to people. Write it down my to-dos, email out list of recommendations. Yeah, and if you follow us on my email list, then you'll get access to this. I'm going to be doing a live stream like this once a week and trying to improve it and do more stuff. So I appreciate you guys' questions and your feedback. If you can, comment what you think about this or questions you want for the next live stream, not on this chat, but on the actual YouTube comment thing afterwards. And that'll actually help the YouTube algorithm to have us be discovered by other people as well. But thanks for watching, guys. I shall chat with you later. Cheers.